Hello and welcome to Community Topics, number 32 of Dualistic Unity. I am free, and freedom has no prerequisites.
I am lying to you. I am misrepresenting the truth right now. Fact is that you think this episode was released today or perhaps this week, and it wasn't, in fact, created today or this week at all. We recorded this weeks ago, knowing that we would need it while we were gone. Because at the moment, I am at the second Dualistic Unity retreat on Vancouver Island with some awesome guests having a great time. I know I'm sitting in the gazebo, making a fire, possibly chilling in the hot tub or eating some fantastic food from Chef Caitlin, just enjoying the most incredible conversations in the most incredible scenery. I know that. I'm not even there yet. I know that. So if you haven't bought your ticket to the Netherlands retreat yet, please do so. Don't wait. Don't take your time. I understand that coming from me, that sounds really weird because normally I'm like, live for the moment, don't plan ahead. But if you don't, in fact, commit to the fact that you want to do this now, you may not have the opportunity because the tickets are going fast. And that's it for the announcements. This episode of Community Topics is about healthy living in a very general kind of way. So I'm not going to be bringing up any statistics or any research that you haven't heard of, frankly, because, and I find this funny, I'm not really the healthy one between Andrew and myself. I've gone farther into the direction of self-loathing and self-destruction than Andrew has. And so I have a different perspective of the path of healthy living and its requirements. So this is going to be a fun conversation. I will toss in from the start, though, that the etymology of health is wholeness. And that will set the tone, hopefully. Andrew.
So yeah, on that note, before we go any further, I just want to get into what I've found to be I call it the enlightened diet. So what you're gonna do is every morning you're gonna pour yourself a cup of black coffee. You're going to toss some butter in there and mix it up. You're going to drink all of that. And then you're going to get 15 grams, not 16 or 14, but 15 grams of pure plant protein. And you're just going to face that stuff. No liquid or anything. Digestive processes just doesn't work with the liquid. After that, you're going to get 2 slices of wheat bread, toast them, rub some black beans on it, and add a little chicken. And after that, I'm just fucking with you. I wanted to see how long I could go with that. But yeah, there is no fucking enlightenment diet. There is no fucking enlightenment. And anything like I just said, any diet you think you have to follow that's gonna make you free, set you free, take you towards enlightenment and soaring into the 5th dimension is a load of horse shit. I'm not saying that it's not great to eat healthy and whatnot, and we'll get into, different avenues. We'll see where this conversation goes, quite frankly. But I thought it'd be fun to see how many people listen to that and are like, start taking some notes and then just absolutely throw that out the window. Because as much as, food does impact us, everyone talks about, the gut brain connection, and I'm very curious about Ray's thoughts on that whole thing. There is a certain amount of restrictions, a certain prison that you place upon yourself that actually can end up taking you away from freedom if you get so caught in a certain narrative that there's any requirements to becoming free. As I said in the intro, freedom has no prerequisites. There is no diet that sets you free. There is no morning routine that sets you free. There is no practice or thing that you can do to set you free. If anything, to get closer to that state of freedom, it's building that faith in yourself through recognizing that you don't need any of those things. And through that, freedom can become, I don't know, more available or more easily recognized, but it's never going to be through the thing, through being healthy or following the latest fad diet. So yeah, with that, I'll throw it back to Ray.
I'm not going to lie. I was starting to get into that a little bit. I was just like, where are we going with this? Should I be taking notes? Because frankly, it was starting to sound kind of nice, except for the raw vegetable extract. Is that correct?
Yeah, plant-based protein. Yeah.
Except for the plant-based protein, that didn't sound good or natural whatsoever. And admittedly, there was a part of my brain, and this would be the part of the brain that we had discussed early in season one, that is purely from the realm of survival, keeps thinking, wow, this sounds really complicated in order to stay alive. So I appreciated that nonetheless. And I thought you did so really convincingly. You actually had me going for a second. So that was fantastic. I was definitely one of those people who would have been making notes if I didn't know you so well. Because admittedly, I was just like, is he going there? What's he doing? He's up to something. So I appreciated the show, and I know our listener did as well. I think in the direction of healthy living, I really want to stress the importance of balance, because you can make yourself sick trying to be healthy. You can stress yourself out trying to be relaxed. You can get in your way in the most creative ways without even recognizing it. And it's so very important to keep that in mind, because if you are exercising for the sake of looking good, for the sake of getting more attention from people, then you may be getting healthier physically, but psychologically, you are doing yourself a great deal of damage. And that damage down the road may actually cause you to self-destruct and hinder all of the progress that you've been making physically otherwise, simply because you don't have the wherewithal or the self-development to know when you're indulging in something unhealthy because you're trying to escape something else. So balance is very important in the consideration of healthy living, which is why I enjoy the etymology being wholeness. Wholeness is the recognition of both sides. As I said earlier, I come from experiences where it was very difficult for me to be able to say, this is a diet that I would like to have because it's healthy. It was very difficult for me to say, this is something that I should have looked at by medical professionals because I didn't have access. Or it was very difficult for me to say, this is a habit that I would like to make a part of my day-to-day routine, because there was so much in terms of chaos. There was so much change happening in my life. So there were numerous points throughout my past where I just didn't have necessarily the opportunities to do the healthy things that I otherwise knew would be good for me. And so I frankly told myself they weren't important. And I carried on despite that. And I will be the first to admit that there are consequences to doing that. Serious ones, because you almost start to convince yourself that you'll never take care of yourself, that whatever it is you're doing to get through the chaos that you're experiencing right now is something you're going to have to do for the rest of your life. It becomes self-defining. And so it becomes a prison. It starts to become who you are. And I just want to mention that this is not the case, that you can change, that the experience you're having that is causing you to do something that is relatively unhealthy in the short term, in order to get through that, once that period is over, you can switch gears. You can, in fact, address that part of your life and do a great deal of good for yourself in doing so, if you're willing to change, if you're willing to grow. So for me, for example, a good portion of my life was very hard and challenging, and I didn't have those opportunities, or rather, I just didn't have the energy to even look for them because I was too busy trying to survive. As things changed for me, I did not address that. If anything, I kind of just went, I've never done it before. Why should I do it now? And now I've gotten older and I've started to recognize I really enjoy living. And more importantly, I really enjoy being able to move around. I really enjoy being able to climb up a hill without getting out of breath. I really enjoy being able to go swimming or be active outside, that kind of thing. And so now I am forced to look at the habits that I've developed over my life and recognize that many of them were just because false certainty. Many of them were just habitual, and start changing them. And that the biggest part of that journey is the recognition that I can, is the acceptance that I can, that there's nothing wrong in doing so, that just because I never did this as a younger person doesn't mean I can't learn now. And so it's actually rather fun to address one's health. But because I've been so far on the other end of the spectrum, I also never take it so seriously that I get bent out of shape needing to get somewhere. Every day to me is an improvement in that direction. Do I need it to be a total change? Am I ever going to get to a point where I'm going to be taking a spoonful of plant-based protein? No, I don't think that's the case. And it's only because, in the same way that I wouldn't take protein powders or synthetic testosterone, it's not something I can maintain. It's not something that can be maintained naturally. It's not something that can be maintained easily without society backing us up. So to me, that's not something I want to learn to rely on. But that doesn't mean that I can't start looking at healthy options that are easy to access, that are things that are easy to maintain over time.
Yeah, I think what you said about being who you are, or attaching to a certain way of living, and kind of identifying with that, there's inevitably going to be pitfalls. And discussing freedom, because that's where we started things off with this, there is no belief that gets you to freedom. There are no unlimiting beliefs. There are no beliefs that let you go from what you think you are. And so whether it's believing I am a weightlifter, or I'm a vegan or a vegetarian, or I follow this diet, or I am this, or I do this, or blah 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 blah. As soon as you do that, you're limiting yourself to reality. Like, once you recognize that none of those things are you, it's almost like Ray and I were talking about this before the episode. As you recognize that none of the things get you there, quote unquote, there, which is here, without so many perceptions of what that means, it's like everything gets put back on the table. Like, all the things that you let go of because you thought that those were it, all of a sudden, like, you're like, oh, I can do all of those things. But it's from a completely different perspective at this point. So if you want to test out, being a vegetarian or vegan or paleo, or any type of diet, or you want to do ice baths for 30 days, or you want to start lifting weights 7 days a week, which I don't recommend. That's a lot of days a week. Your body need the rest is when the muscle builds and whatnot. I won't get too into that, but it's like everything all of a sudden becomes available, but it's through a state of freedom as opposed to from a prison trying to escape. Because a lot of people do all of those things thinking that that's going to get them there. They're there, always there. You've always been there, thinking that this thing's going to get them there. It never does. But the thought that it will takes you further from recognizing that nothing can get you there. And I've actually had at a mushroom trip last year where I was just kind of realizing a lot of these things and how many things people cling to for, like, a certain diet or a certain way of living, or a certain, you have to do this. These are the 10 quintessential ways to, become free or whatever. And it's just, all the typical stuff that everyone says you got to do, whether it's whole plant-based, you got to, you have the whole toxic male type Andrew Tate requirements to being free, which is just a hilarious statement. And I remember going through all of them, just being like, sure, sure, sure. That was just my response to every single one. It's like, you don't need it, but there are options. You can do them, but we just get so caught up in thinking that, oh, this is the thing. This is the thing that's going to get me there. And I just really wanted to reiterate on this episode, obviously, as I'm doing, that there is nothing that gets you there. All of that said, as Ray went into some of the things that he has done throughout his life, I do have things that I do in my life. And there are ways that I that things that I do that work for me, but it's there's never this thought that this is something that I have to do. Like I've consistently lifted weights, for example, for since I was 13 years old. Like I started getting into it. I was like, this is cool. I was playing a bunch of sports. I was like, hey, this will maybe help me a little bit, play a little bit better, be a little bit stronger. And so yeah, I talked to my dad and I was like, hey, can you make me a workout thing? And I just started following that. And I was like, oh, this is a cool thing to do. And then, but since then, there have been there was a very long time up until recently that it was something I felt like I needed. People get caught up in thinking like, oh, I need to work out in order to stay sane. Without my workouts, I don't know what I would do. And that has been the thing that I've been able to let go of the last couple of years because for a very long time, like to do something for that long, because I'm almost 28. So it's been almost 15 years of consistently lifting weights. Like there aren't many things that many people do in their life for 15 years straight. And it's shifted for me. My perspective of it is what's shifted. And it's gone from being something that I felt like I needed, being something that I felt like gave me value, being something that I thought allowed me to basically feel better about myself, to something that is just kind of a habit. And it's because it's not, harming me or harming reality in any way, shape, or form. It's just something that I've kind of continued doing. And so I still work out. There have been times in my life where I have worked out 7 days a week. There have been times in my life where I've worked out, 1 or 2 days a week. And now it's just kind of like ranges from 2 days a week to 4 days a week. About it's like if I go a couple days with I have other things I'm prioritizing and I get back into it and I'm like, okay, I can get back into it. But there's not the shame or the guilt that comes along with it. Like, oh, I haven't worked out in 3 days. I feel bad about myself. It's like that is more and more quickly being let go of. And it's just looking at everything going on in my life. It's like, okay, I was gonna work out early this morning, but I'm kind of working on this right now, and I'd rather do this for the next couple hours. And then if it comes up later, cool, but it no longer means so much about me because there isn't so much of a story anymore. And I think the same goes for diets. And people get all fucking righteous with their diets. That just cracks me up. And they judge people for eating in a certain way or not eating a certain way. And it's like that judgment about what the person is doing is so much worse for you than the thing that person is doing, which I just find very funny. Like the thought of like, oh, I'm doing the right thing. Like fuck off with that. Like you're not any better than anyone else just because you chose to do something. And if anything, building up that idea of yourself is eventually going to come tumbling down. And to think that there's anything that you do that makes you better than anyone else is just another thing that takes you further from freedom. And so there's a lot of lifestyles that people cling to that they think gives them value, and none of them ever do. None of them add any value to you, and none of them necessarily take any value away from you. But there are certain things that you can recognize, and once you let go of the ideas of yourself that you think need to be worked on, things kind of equalize in a way. Like you find things that work because you're prioritizing your experience. And that's what it's come down to for me with anything that I do is I'm prioritizing my experience. It doesn't add any value to me, but as Ray said, I also enjoy living, and I enjoy not the comfort that comes from being healthy, but at least the ability to do things more fully, almost like I've more energy, more ability to do things without, the twangs of pain or the stomach ache from eating a bunch of unhealthy shit all the time. Like, yeah, I eat unhealthy stuff. I got a fucking diet soda right next to me that I'm sipping on during this episode. And it comes down to you. It comes down to what works for you. And the beauty of food and any sort of lifestyle is it kind of regulates itself. Like you're going to know when you're overdoing it. Your body's going to be like, oh, we're not feeling great right now. And there's a self-regulating process that if you're attentive to it, it kind of informs itself.
I love the fact that we keep coming back to the symbolism of the ego in terms of not just how it affects us as an awareness, but how it physiologically does the same thing as it does to us as an awareness. It actually eats away at us. In the community topics episode where we were talking about cancer and the placebo effect and whatnot, we discussed numerous different ways that it is obvious our mentality is contributing to so many of our health problems. And so just the symbolism of that is something we keep coming back to, that it's the mentality more so than pretty much everything else. And I'd like to point out, for example, and we've talked about this before, that the stress of needing to lose weight will actually make it more difficult for you to digest your food and more difficult for you to get the momentum to go out and exercise. So regardless of you wanting to make these changes, it's coming from that place of should, and that's disempowering you. And so I find it interesting that we keep coming back to that our experience in the world really is symbolism for what we're going through in our awareness. The power of that, the nuance of that, the sensitivity to that is a whole other world, but it's something that we haven't been looking at for the most part. But I think a big part of it is coming back to the value of your experience. So for me, for example, about 10 years ago, I was at a point where if I woke up in the morning, I would hobble to the bathroom, like crouched over in pain. And I would be like that for about 20 minutes as I started to like move around and kind of stretch things out. And it was getting worse every day. My back, same thing, rib out of alignment. There was so many things, as well as in the back of my neck, and not to mention the eye pain. Like things were bad for me, man. Like I couldn't breathe most of the time. It was getting really bad. And so the exercise that I do now, the way that I eat, how often I eat, that's another thing I want to get into a little bit as we go on. That really is just, for me, not just about being healthy, but also minimizing the pain. Like taking those steps to push through the pain a little bit have gradually led me to a point where there is dramatically less pain. And so it really is about the experience. It's about the experience, because if I was thinking about myself, I probably wouldn't be pushing past the pain. I would be telling myself a narrative about the pain. I was in a session earlier this week, and I was talking to somebody else about the experience of pain, and they were having a real problem dealing with it. And I said, well, don't deal with the pain. The pain is what it is. Deal with your preference regarding the pain. Deal with your opinion of the pain. Let that go. Let the pain be what it is. And so they came back, I think a day later, and they were like, that was a different experience. They were meditating on it, and they had a profound shift. And it was simply because we forget that our perception of the pain is not the pain itself, right? The experience of the pain is the experience of living. It's an opportunity for you to look at it and decide what you're going to do with it to some degree. And if you can push through it a little bit within reason, because again, just like a muscle can be strengthened, it can also be torn. There's a degree of reason. And I think that we find the sensitivity for that reason in the process of abandoning our ego, in the process of letting go of the narrative. All of a sudden, the choices we make are made with a bit more intelligence and reasonability. And what I mean is that if you have a limited budget, for example, and you're not telling yourself, well, I just got to survive and blah, 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 and you're not telling yourself this giant narrative, you typically have a little bit more patience, and you can look a little bit farther into the future. And so you would be more apt to, say, do what Andrew did when he was living in New York, which was to make himself a large meal and then segment it into smaller pieces and put that in the freezer and whatnot over a good period of time, because that saves on money and it allows you to invest in a healthier option. Or you can go and buy a 99-cent special at McDonald's. And it really just comes down to how much are you on the run? How much are you invested in the end result? How much are you invested in trying to be something? Because that's all taking away from the wherewithal that you would need to be able to sit down for 5 minutes and plan a meal. And that's really it. It really does affect everything. But the more aware you are, the more likely you are to make different choices that reflect how aware you are.
That is well said. When you're not so caught up in the idea of yourself, you actually have a lot more time than you may realize to do things. Like we spend so much of our time thinking about ourselves. And beyond that, it's like once we're done thinking about it, we're doing things to build it, doing things to avoid having it be diminished. And as that drops, like you start doing things for the sake of doing them for their own reward. You have more time because you're not so caught up in your mind thinking about it. You're not spending so much time having to deal with the ramifications of being so caught up in that idea of yourself. You have more time because you're not so caught up in the idea of yourself. And then you have more time because you're not doing so many things trying to build or fear that value being lowered. And so through that, and I like that you brought that up because I wasn't even thinking about that. But when because I do overall eat relatively healthy, and because I feel good when I do it, and I have a big appetite, and if I'm not eating healthy, it's just gonna like keep fucking piling on, and I would probably be about 30 pounds heavier. Which doesn't mean my value drops by any means. But when you do have that time and there's that priority for your experience, not for anyone else, but it comes back to your experience for you, there's just a process that unravels, a mentality that unravels that starts to align with the flow of reality a little bit more. Like because you're not so caught up in all the other shit and running around, there isn't the need to just grab whatever's available, which is usually some instant gratification, some things. And on top of that, even a lot of people, because they have a certain viewpoint about themselves, there are certain hormones that get released when you eat. And so people use that as a way to feel better about yourself. And it's very similar to addictive patterns. When you don't have something that you're trying to feel better about, there isn't the need to grab onto the things that cause you to temporarily feel better and long term feel a lot worse. So there isn't so much of that need anymore. And it goes for everything as your need to be seen in a certain way drops and begins to go away. There are so many things that you'll realize that you were doing to try and feel better, basically. And living an unhealthy lifestyle is a lot of times just people trying to temporarily feel a little bit better in the short term. And when that goes away, start prioritizing your experience for you. And then you start looking at things from, it's almost like you zoom out a little bit. You start to realize, oh, there's a longer term approach to this. I don't need to feel so much better right now because I feel like so much fucking shit right now. And so I can actually do things that, oh wow, this food actually I do enjoy. This food isn't giving me that crazy dopamine spike, but at the same time, because I'm a little bit more zoomed out, not so honed in, and have these fucking blinders on through the barrier of the idea of me thinking that I'm separate from reality. As you're zoomed out, you start to see things a little bit differently. And you start, and even just being willing to try different things too. Like that's something that I've done throughout my life. As I've said, a bunch of different workout routines, played a bunch of different sports, but I've also tried a bunch of different types of diets. Like just fuck it. Why not? I'm going to try this. And I've gone in and out, taken things to extremes because I can be a very extreme person. And I know you said you wanted to get into meal timing and whatnot. I'll give a little spiel or amount of times that you eat and whatnot along those lines, and then I'll throw it back to Ray. I got into intermittent fasting like what was it 5 or 6 years ago towards the end of college, and I took that fucker to an extreme, and there was a recognition on the end of that. It's like I had, not that I had to, but that's just what I do with a lot of things. And so I got to a point where I was eating one meal a day, and but it wasn't like naturally eating one meal a day. It was like that became an aspect of me. That became part of my identity. I was someone who only ate once a day. And so my first couple of years of work, like I wouldn't eat throughout the entire workday. And then I would get home and I would eat a big fucking meal. And it got to a point, not to say it was ever like binge eating, but it was probably getting very close because I would eat a lot because I, need a decent amount of food as the person that I am, the size of me, and so I was eating a lot of fucking food at once, and there was a resistance to eating throughout the day. There was almost like a fear in that. It got to a point that it was so much what I was or who I was that I couldn't do it. I couldn't let myself down through doing that other thing. And there were absolutely pros and cons, as I've talked about, just now some of the cons, but some of the pros were that I felt really good. Like I didn't have the lull throughout the day that you often get from eating a bunch of food because digesting food takes a bunch of energy. And so I could work throughout the day and be fucking on it all day. Like there was no drop in that energy, but it was very much, it's almost like it was because of that. And so I was passing the buck, passing the responsibility onto my lifestyle. But that being said, over the last few years, I sort of recognized how much it was like a limitation and how much identity was involved. Like, fuck, I gave a presentation to my office at work about the benefits of intermittent fasting and how everyone should do it back in like 2019. And it's funny thinking back to that, all the things that I said. But that's part of it. That's part of the journey. And so now, as it's gotten to this point, I still kind of do that. I still will go throughout the day and like today, haven't eaten anything yet today because quite frankly, I'm not hungry. I don't feel a need to eat right when I wake up in the morning. I got a workout in. I'll have some coffee and whatnot. But if someone were to bring home like some food, I wouldn't be like, oh, can't do it. Can't do it. Like I'll fucking have breakfast. And on days that we don't have work, just because I do feel a lot more alert, a lot more energy when I'm not sort of weighed down by that, like I'll mix it in here and there. I'll have breakfast because there isn't this thing that like doing that is stronger than me. Like I am stronger than anything that I could ever possibly do. And so through that, there's been a balance found where it's like, I'll still work it in. I understand the benefits, but I also understand the pitfalls of getting so attached to it. And I think it's that attachment, that passing of responsibility onto something else outside of you that really is the ultimate pitfall of any diet or lifestyle that you cling to.
Well said. I think just as with facing the ego, our tendency to identify takes a certain degree of courage and fortitude, so does being healthy. I think that those who are healthy because they have a certain attitude towards life and challenges in some regard. There are a number of people who, for example, will willingly push themselves to their limit when it comes to exercise, but in their own personal lives, when it comes to pushing their limits and letting go of their identity, they don't necessarily do that quite as much, except in the regards to exercise. But there is an attitude in that regard of fortitude, of the willingness to take on a challenge. And so I think that's a big part of this. I know for me, especially, being willing to just put in the time rather than going, that hurts, I'm not going to do it, has led me to slowly rebuild an entire part of my body over time, one muscle at a time, because it's so interesting to me how quickly my body is willing to adapt its shape and how it functions to move around pain, not knowing that it's actually perpetuating a long-term consequence in doing so. And so you almost have to force yourself or your body to address the pain because it's looking for a way to feel more comfortable. It's looking for a way to feel better. Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that exactly what we're doing with our ego almost all the time? And so it's really important to keep that in mind that, for example, you may be hungry. That doesn't mean that your body needs to eat. That insight, it's difficult. And I know, coming from a background of poverty where I only wanted to eat, I get it. But you don't always need to eat. Quite often, you're quite fine without a meal. Like Andrew, I haven't eaten since dinner yesterday. We're recording this at noon the day after. And I'm okay. I'm not hungry at all. Mind you, a couple of days back, I had a nice big breakfast. I had some snacks for lunch. I had a nice big dinner over 2 beers. Came home, had some potato chips and some dip, watched a movie. So there's no rhyme or reason to it, is what I'm saying. It really just comes down to how I feel right now and my awareness of how I'm going to feel based on the ripple that I'm creating with each and every individual choice. That's it. It's not about avoiding the consequence so much as being aware of when there is a benefit to the consequence, how much consequence there needs to be for you to get to that benefit. As always, it's in facing the challenge, it's in facing the hardship, it's in facing the thing that you don't want to face, that you find out more about yourself. And that is healthy living. That is the experience of being whole and experiencing yourself unfolding.
Amen. Okay, something else you brought up yesterday that I found very interesting that goes into kind of pivoting into vegan vegetarianism is that plants scream and plants are alive too. And so there's this whole narrative with vegans and vegetarians that, oh, you know, don't eat animals because if especially you guys, you recognize that they're you, like why would you do that? Like, guess what? Plants are me too. And so there's this divide between we see it as like animals are more conscious than plants or anything else in reality. And so there's a resistance to doing so. And I know you have a few more examples, so I'll let you toss those in there regarding the hypocrisy of those sorts of communities when it comes to protecting animals and whatnot. And because a lot of people are doing those things, and if it, again, nothing wrong with it. If it makes you feel better internally, great. It's a lifestyle you can do. But a lot of people get into them not not just because it makes them feel better, or sometimes not even because it makes them physically feel better, but it makes them mentally feel better about themselves. Yeah, yeah. Rub those knuckles off. Why don't you? Because you're a good person, and seeing yourself as a good person is one of the deepest pitfalls of that you can fall into in an egotistical mindset. I don't see myself as a good person. I don't attach to that narrative by any means. It's all in there. It's all fucking in there. So to settle upon that and then to sort of have this aura of looking down upon people that live in a certain way or do certain things is comical to think that people are that self-righteous and that limited to think that they are just that. But I find it very interesting getting into that in the discussions of those things that people like to avoid insights that go against what make them feel good, that go against the beliefs about reality and certain things that allow them to feel a little bit better because they're relying upon it to feel a little bit better about themselves. And anything you rely upon to make yourself feel a little bit better is something to be looked at, something to be questioned.
And it really goes back to exactly what we've been talking about in terms of just the ego being at play and stopping us from being healthy or whole, right? Because often we just oversimplify these arguments because it's convenient to do so and we can identify ourselves as such. And then we can evaluate ourselves via comparison to a superficial assumption. This happens all the time. It's not just about diet necessarily, but also about exercising as a whole. How many times do you meet somebody who goes to the gym religiously and judges people who don't? It's another means of the ego perpetuating itself. And right there, that person is getting less out of their experience at the gym than they could be if they were just going for the sake of going to the gym, feeling better about their moment to moment experience, right? Because looking at someone and making a superficial assumption that just because they don't go to the gym, that they are not, in fact, healthy is only self-validating. You don't know anything about that person. They could swim a lot. They could eat really healthy or very little. They could do a very active job. There's a number of things that could be happening in that person's world. You don't know, right? And so it's really important to remember that we're always trying to validate. We're always trying to justify, and that is especially true just because it's the ego. And a good example of that, and I know you brought this up, is the fact that vegetarians seem to like blocking out the reality of the fact that plants have an experience, because plants can't communicate that experience. Now, I find this really interesting because in the UK, they have recently made it illegal to hunt and fish squid as a food source. And it's because they have recognized that squid are sentient beings. And so they have decided we are no longer eating squid. Squid don't talk. So it's because we took the time to really look at the squid that that became a thing. Plants also don't talk. They don't speak a language, but they do. And science is starting to show that more and more. There have been a number of research studies. I'm not going to cite them. You can go check it out, showing that plants not only communicate through subaudible clicking noises beneath the ground, but they actually work together through the root system as well as their connections via mycelium to provide support for one another. They actually do work together as a cohesive unit, to the point where there are groves of trees in Africa that once a herd of giraffes come up to them and start chewing on the one side of the grove to work their way through, the other trees on the other side become more poisonous. As that's going on, they respond to one another, knowing, oh, we're being eaten. And so they react. Why don't vegetarians talk about that? Well, because that makes them look like assholes. That's more or less why. Right? Now, the same could be true for people who are like, all right, meat, gotta eat that meat. My argument always comes down to this: how much of your diet is the product of privilege and comfort? How much of what you're eating is the result of the fact that convenience has made it possible for you to do so? I think that's an interesting consideration, because it's not just about being healthy today. There have been numerous periods during human history where the tide has turned and reality has not been so forthcoming with the resources, and we still had to find a way to be healthy to the best of our ability. Recessions, depressions, war. How well do you think your average person who goes to the supermarket and specifically has to pick certain organic products, how well do you think they're going to fare when they are limited to the food products that are possibly just created in their local geographic area?
Yeah, and that comes back to that faith in yourself and recognizing that anything you put in you, and this is another, argument that the vegetarian vegan community goes with, is especially on the spiritual side of things, that when an animal is killed, it's embodying fear, and so as you eat it, you are ingesting the fear of the animal. And the argument we've made a few times is that if you're afraid of ingesting the fear from the animal, you've already done it. You're already embodying fear. You don't have to ingest fear because you're already afraid. And so that's what you can look at. And even to think that, the animal has a certain vibration that it's embodying, and then it just overtakes me. And it's like, motherfucker, do you not have a vibration that you're embodying? And if you're not afraid, why do you think that you can't have influence over the animal that you're eating? Right? Like, wouldn't that make sense that you're embodying an aura as well? So I always find that one very interesting, and funny that As soon as you're afraid of ingesting the fear, you've already done it. You're already afraid. Um, if you got anything else on that, there's one more part I wanted to get into, which is like the drugs and alcohol side of healthy living. And I know we've kind of talked about balance already and whatnot, but for me, again, when it comes to drugs and alcohol and all of that stuff, and I know we had a full episode on alcohol as well. So if you want to hear us talk about it in depth, definitely go back to that one as well. It's like early 20s, I think. It was a few weeks ago or a month or two ago. But with all of those things, like I was saying before, it becomes a sort of self-regulating process, but because there are pitfalls to certain substances, right? Like, the pitfalls of having too much alcohol is way worse than taking too many mushrooms or having too much weed. Like, if you feel fucking terrible the next day. And oftentimes you have to go back to the root of why you're doing it. When you drink a lot, and for me, like, I'm speaking from experience, when I was dealing with, through college, if I was a little, worried or nervous going to a certain event, like, oh, here's a quick, easy fix. Let's drink a bunch of booze. And everyone is doing it. So you didn't even really question it very much as to why and how much of a shortcut it is. And again, I am not in any way demonizing this and saying you should stay away from it. I don't. I still drink from time to time and drink a lot from time to time. And but it comes back to you and your experience and how much of a sober mentality you're trying to avoid. So as that is worked on, the necessity for anything goes down, and you kind of come full circle to being like, okay, well, I don't need any of those things, but here's another experience I could have. There's maybe something I could learn or get out of this, or maybe there's not much I could get out of this, and I'm just going to do it for the fuck of it because I'm eternal, and why the fuck not? But people almost equate the alcohol conversation to like any substance. And so we just have this sort of overlaid narrative of like, okay, alcohol is this way, careful, might get addicted. And we've talked about addiction and how it's really an avoidance of a your general experience that you're trying to escape. And so people will think of, something like mushrooms in that way and be like, oh, careful, don't take too much. You might get addicted. And it's just a completely different conversation to be had, because especially something like mushrooms, it's not an escape. I think there is an aspect of it where if you think that the mushrooms are doing it, as opposed to recognizing that it's always you can build a sort of attachment to it. But it's not, again, the mushrooms, just like with alcohol, it's not the alcohol that's this thing that just overtakes me and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you're trying to escape. You're trying to escape a general mentality that you tend to embody. And as you work on that, your perspective of all of these things changes as well. You start to see the repercussions of clinging to anything outside of yourself. Because for a very long time, if you're trying to escape a certain mentality, you'll be like, fuck it, I'll be hungover. I don't care. That's a trade-off I'm willing to make. But then as you begin to prioritize that experience, let go of the idea that your value goes up or down ever, you're like, oh shit, I don't really feel like spending a whole day hungover all the time. From time to time, sure, I'll make that trade. Why the fuck not? But it's not this thing that you feel like you need anymore. And so, like with everything we've been talking about, it's that shift in mentality in your day-to-day experience that informs your perspective on everything else, from diet, exercise, drugs, booze. All of it is informed by that state in which you embody in your day-to-day experience.
Absolutely. Because as we've mentioned, it's not really the substance, it's the addiction to the escape. It's the addiction to even just the easy out, the answer. Right. And so once you're beyond that, then everything starts to change. That's where we end up with the expression that I like, that everything in moderation including moderation itself. Like every once in a while, it's good to go overboard because that informs your sensitivity to moderation, as opposed to limiting yourself and thus your experience and thus your ability to relate to others and to feel a little bit more free and possibly have experiences that would lead to growth that you can't currently comprehend. It's the reason it's worth pushing beyond that boundary. It's the reason it's worth pushing beyond that pain, or it's pushing beyond that discomfort all the time, is because you grow as a result. You grow as a result. But that all said, and this is true for drugs, alcohol, overeating, not exercising enough, whatever it might be. Beware the egotistical trap of self-validating and justifying through comparison, because this is something that I hear a lot. Somebody, for example, wants to quit smoking and they tell me, like, I want to quit smoking, but on the bright side, I smoke less than my buddy and he smokes a pack a day. Okay, so that's an interesting bar. Or I really want to lose weight, but on the bright side, everybody else has a way fatter ass than me, so I'm not doing too bad, right? Okay, you can do that into oblivion. What if everybody around you continues to get fatter? Are you always going to use them as your bar that you measure yourself against? In which case, you're not really taking accountability and you're always being led by everybody else and what they're willing to do. That's a dangerous and slippery slope. It's the same as being willing to lie just because everybody else is in the habit of lying, right? Well, they're lying as much as I am. It's okay. What happens, right? So it's very easy to justify what we're doing and how we are just by comparison to other people. And our brain does that very happily. Keep that in mind. Oh, at least I don't drink as much as so-and-so. Oh, at least I don't do the same drugs as what's his name. That. It's very easy. Just keep it in mind. You don't have to judge yourself. Just remember, right, everything is a consideration. That said, I don't think that there's anything wrong with experiencing most things with a degree of awareness. So as long as you're beyond that need, then you're going to be beyond that point where you're really at risk of doing something unhealthy because you are practicing awareness. So, for example, I have no doubt in my mind that I'll be in my 60s, possibly high on ecstasy, maybe a little bit of acid from time to time, might even do a line of coke. Just saying. Why? I don't know. It's optional. Maybe it pops up at a party, something like that. Is it something that I need to do? No. Is it something I'm going to go out of my way to look for? No. But it's not something I'm going to avoid because, that's not a healthy decision. We are all going to die. We're all going to die. Every single one of our bodies is going to fade and drift away into the primordial goo that is reality. And we will have other bodies that pop up. That's the nice thing about eternal life. But you don't know when you're going to die. See, that's kind of the bitch about all of this, is that you can eat healthy, exercise, take care of yourself, take care of your mind, spend a good portion of time meditating, learning about your body, all of that stuff. Walk out your door and get hit by a stray comet. It doesn't give you control. See, that's the thing. You can do everything right and still get a heart attack. You can do everything right and still have a stroke in your 20s. This is the reality. And so the question isn't just how long do you want to live? It's how much do you want to live? That's the question. When you get to the end of your life, let's say you live into your ripe old age of 100, let's just say, but you have never put yourself in danger. You've never pushed yourself in a way that was so challenging you thought you might break. And as a result, you've never seen what you're capable of. You've never seen the world beyond your limited view of what the world is. That's a tragedy. That's a shame. So you got to exist for a long time. That's not the same as living. It's not. So as always, there's balance. There's balance. Take care of yourself, but not so much that you live in a bubble.
Live for today and then find that balance that works for you. Yeah, I've tried Coke a couple times. Super overrated. in my opinion, by the way. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the whole thing about that is. And now we got the whole fentanyl thing going on, and I'm just like, nah, I'm good. There's no drug that I've had also that comes even close to the experience of freedom, too. It's like pales in comparison. But yeah, the comparison to feel better. It's funny how quickly that can become something that makes you feel so much worse. It's two sides of the same coin. If you're relying on something similar to self-love, like if you rely on fucking telling yourself, I love myself, I'm this, I'm that, positivity affirmations, that is the same coin. The other side of that coin is self-hate, self-loathing. It's the same fucking thing. You don't have to tell yourself a story. You don't have to justify your actions based on someone else. Live for you, focus on you, do it for your experience, and let go of the idea that your value could ever possibly go up or down. And that will inform so much more of the way that you live than trying to rely on anything outside of yourself.
It's so funny because this entire episode we're talking about health, but nothing has really changed from the topics that we talk about the rest of the time, because what we're saying is quite simply the path to healthy living is the path of recognizing that you're whole, because in that you are in a state of responsibility where it's more about how you want to experience your wholeness than it is about trying to get to wholeness. And so you make decisions from a state of wholeness. You embody wholeness, and your health follows.
Well said. I think we did a great job of covering the experience of living, whether that's you perceive that to be healthy or sometimes unhealthy or whichever way you want to take it. We're not telling you to do anything. We're not telling you there's a right way or a wrong way. I think we did a pretty good job of getting that point across. Nothing gets you to freedom. No diet or exercise regimen or way of life sets you free, but it is available when you let go of that idea that any of them could possibly set you free. So I really enjoyed this one. We are currently at the retreat as Ray started this one out as probably smoking a little bit of weed, staring into the void right now, just recognizing how much it's always been myself having a grand old time enjoying that experience. So again, we got another one coming up in November. At this point, there's probably maybe still a few tickets left. It's in the Netherlands. It's going to be a fucking blast, and I look forward to seeing many of you there.
Bye, everyone.